Speaking freedom, giving you the answers to be free. Be free.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance is about to begin.
Hey everyone, welcome to Speaking Freedom TV. I am your host, Dr. Kaci, and we are on a journey to freedom with our guest, Purdeep. Purdeep, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of start with what I do right now, and then we can get into how I got here. So I'm a husband, I'm a father. I got two young ones. I have a 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. I'm up here in Canada, so a little bit north of probably much of your audience. And I am an entrepreneur, firstly. So I spend a lot of time in business, but my biggest passion is really helping other people. I think before we started the show, we were talking about, what you do, and my focus is very much similar, is helping people live to their highest potential and also have a high quality of life. Because those two don't always go together. And so those are the two parts that I focus on. And I have a specific, you could say, niche that I work with, which is men and men's leadership, because I see big challenges there, particularly in today's era. And so just through sheer grace, luck, having some great mentors, academic background, experience, we've developed a skill set to be able to work with men in particular to help them be successful in their careers or business, but also be successful as partners in life, so spouses as husbands and fathers. And that's my biggest mission, because I know if we have stronger men in families, we can have stronger communities and stronger societies. So that's ultimately my mission.
So, how did you come to a place of wanting to impact men the way that you do?
Yeah, interesting. So first of all, I didn't start wanting to work with men. It's just something that opened up for me, and I kept ignoring it. But uh, when I opened those doors, sometimes there's a bigger reason for the things that are presented to us. And for me, it was working with men. But the background is essentially I'm a son of immigrants. So my parents immigrated over from India in the early 70s to Canada. And I was born and raised in a very small town and grew up on an orchard, because my parents started working on an orchard where they immigrated over. In fact, when they were picking apples, and sometimes they didn't have anybody take care of us, they would put my brother and I in an apple bin. So that would be kind of like our playpen. And then eventually they bought their own orchard and started their own business, and it grew from there. But I grew up in a very interesting environment. So my dad, as an immigrant, he was also a police officer in India for a short period of time, 6 or 7 years before he immigrated over. But he didn't have any education, so all he could do was work hard, right, and do manual labor. My mom wasn't educated at all. She was, I think, school up until grade 5, and then moved over. And just so through sheer hard work, just like most immigrants, they were able to create a life for themselves and for my brother and I. And they dedicated everything to us. And going through that process for them wasn't always easy, because my dad was giving money back to his parents and family in India and his siblings while he was trying to raise kids here on minimum wage, which I feel for him.
Right.
And I didn't realize until later as I grew up, but he struggled. My dad did struggle. He was a hard worker, but he didn't know how to have self-fulfillment, and therefore he went to the bottle. And so he struggled with alcoholism pretty much as long as I can remember. And then I also saw the dynamics between my mom and my dad when he was sober, because when he was sober, he was an awesome dad. Like, I couldn't have asked for more. He was always there for us. Very masculine man. He was 6'1", 240 pounds, very strong. So when he was sober, it was like awesome. Nothing could hurt our family. When he drank too much, and for whatever reason, there was things that set him apart. It was like a bomb went off in the house, and he was a completely different man. And that was very scary as a young boy. So I started to try to understand when he was going to drink, to try to figure out how to get prepared myself, right?
Right.
And so I studied his behavior, his demeanor, his mannerisms, and got to a point where I was pretty good in terms of predicting when he was going to drink and how much. And I would tell my mom, I think he's going to drink tonight. She's like, no, he's not going to drink. And then lo and behold, he would drink. So that was kind of, you can say, kind of like a defense mechanism. But then I also grew up in an environment which was very mindful. Growing up at an orchard, I would spend almost entire days by myself and not be around a single person and not speak to anybody, but just be me, the trees, and nature. So I'm very thankful looking back on that in terms of how I grew up, because that allowed me a big element of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think the cool part is when my grandparents immigrated over, my grandfather was in the Indian military for 35 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
And he fought in two wars for India and was such a wise man. And he was born in the early 1920s and knew multiple languages, was educated by the British, for example, and taught me a lot about philosophy, taught me a lot about principles, and particularly principles about being a man. So he would say things like, your principles are your most important thing. Your word is your bond, for example. People can take away anything they want from you in your life. They can take away your house, your money, your credentials. They can even take away the shirt off your back because he
Mm-hmm.
experienced it. But he said the one thing they can't take away from you are your values. And so that to this day rings true to me. And I'm so thankful he was around because this challenge that we see in men today, I do believe a lot of it is based on lack of effective mentorship or improper
Mm-hmm.
mentorship or discounting membership. And my grandfather was a son of, so my great grandfather was a spiritual teacher in India for 65 years. So my grandfather was a very spiritual man. And I would say this is an incredible balance. He was a military man, but also the most spiritual man in you. So he balanced both, and it was really interesting. And he taught me about spirituality, he taught me mindfulness and meditation as a young boy. And then I got into, at a very young age, when I was like in grade six, so 11 years old, started to study brain science at that time, and then performance psychology when I was a little bit older. And add that up over the years, it really created this whole, how do I say it, ecosystem and path of understanding a wide spectrum of dynamics when it comes to human beings, but also particularly men, performance, relationships, parenting. And it just all came together for me as I was going through the corporate world and then eventually start my businesses because a lot of my guy friends would come to me and say, "Hey, how would you deal with this? How would you deal with that?" And I became their confidant or mentor, and even men that were older. And so this whole area, when I created my business, was supposed to be for helping business professionals excel their careers or their businesses. But it just opened up into a completely different area because my background academically as well, and I've done a lot of research in this area. I built an entire business and organization around the science and psychology of high performance. So my background's in performance and psychology and neuroscience. So that's a big element of the work that I do. And the other part to this is also because I grew up in a traditional Indian household, there were gender roles and gender roles that were respected and actually worked out very well. And it wasn't that, it was, oh, you're a woman, you do that, and a man, you do that, and that's it. Um, there was working together, but my dad knew his strengths and my mom knew her strengths, and they were a team. And that I think is very much lost in today's society as well,
Mm-hmm.
because I have my own personal opinion through observations and studies that there's nothing wrong with gender roles. We shouldn't pigeonhole people, but just like any team, there are roles and there's
Mm-hmm.
accountability and responsibility. And the best and most effective teams, and you understand this being, coming from the military, is you play to people's strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that? What are the natural strengths that men have? What are the natural strengths that women have? And how do you use that and be a team rather than hold that against each other, which is happening in today's society? So fast forward, that's what I do. That's my passion. I wrote The Complete Man in 2020, a book, which is, how do you perform at your highest potential? How do you achieve your highest potential, but also be fulfilled in life? Because I knew in 2020, I stopped everything from my own personal stuff. I told my team, I said, I'm not taking on any more work. I'm writing this book. In 9 months, wrote it and published it because I knew that men would, in particular, would be going through some significant challenges because they were losing their jobs, they were losing their businesses, and men, significantly more than women, tie their identities to their careers. And we know that has a massive impact not only on their mental health, but also the health of the relationship. Because when men lose their jobs, there's a higher level of divorce rate than when women do. And then the
Mm-hmm.
impact on children. So that's when I wrote the book, and have been trying to help men ever since. Uh, and on top of that, when my dad passed away in 2018 from a sudden heart attack, it was like a sign from him because he had diabetes, which the symptoms accelerated because of his alcohol and eventually it caused his passing. But it was like a sign from him saying, "Hey, son, you gotta double down on this. You gotta work even harder and help men even more." Because I can say today, and then I promise I'll be quiet. More men in my network now, close friends that I grew up with strong values and principles, good family men, I have witnessed go through some significant mental health challenges, and some even deal with significant substance abuse issues.
Hmm.
And I look back on that and I say, holy crow, these are men that grew up in good families and have good families. What went wrong? And those are the kinds of challenges that we're seeing here today, where even good men are being, going stray. And there's a number of reasons for it that we can talk about here. So now I'm gonna be quiet here.
Well, you're on a podcast, so the goal is for you to talk. However, so I wanted to ask, you talked about noticing your dad's behavior patterns when he would drink. Was there any thing that you noticed was triggering to your dad? Like, what was it that happened that you would be like, "Oh, this is one of those nights."
Oh, so I wouldn't say there's anything. Let's just say there's sometimes where it was a hard day's work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was extremely stressful, things like that. But I was just watching for demeanor, like how he would walk around the house, and it's hard to explain. But I could see his whether it's unrest or
Mm-hmm.
if he had something else in mind. Sometimes, for example, and this is something that I learned as I move forward because I always thought it was my dad's issue. Part of this was also my mom's issue because
Mm-hmm.
when my dad would drink, my mom would just go into control mode because she was always watching, how it does is he going to be out of control because she would always try to control him. So the moment she would do that, my dad would drink more, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there was this whole
Trigger.
back
It
and
was it
forth.
was like a domino effect.
Exactly, exactly. So I was watching both of their behaviors from that perspective. But what I also realized was my dad was also lacking passion
Mm-hmm.
because my mom was a great woman, but she fully didn't know how to open up herself to my dad because she dealt with some past challenges. Her dad died when she was 8 years old. Her mom died 3 days after she got married. She was a woman that was brought to as a young girl at 17 years old to a new country, which, it was, and told to start working physical hard labor
Mm-hmm.
immediately. And so she's working 12-hour days, and fending for herself. Like she had her brother there, but her sister-in-law, so my mom's brother's wife, was not a nice woman, right? So there was a whole dynamic. So those are some of the things. And so when I saw my dad, and I could see sometimes my behavior now, is when he didn't get the things he needed from my mom in terms of whether it was acknowledgement or affection or passion, the bottle would be his way of tuning out,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Mm-hmm.
this element of having a lot of responsibility and trying to let that go, lack of passion, or trying to find some kind of passion. And my dad was a phenomenal man from the perspective. Everybody who has met my dad is like, I miss your dad. Because my dad was not only the most masculine man I knew, because he could walk into a room and it was, we talk about presence. You wouldn't have to see him, you could feel his presence.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he was the most emotional man. He would cry in front of people, but no one would test his masculinity
Right.
because it wasn't, hey, he's not masculine because he's crying. They knew how masculine it was. So it was this interesting dynamic that I saw, but there were certain triggers that I saw with him that kind of said, okay, I think he's going to drink. Even the things like how he would dress after a shower.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he wore something really nice, I'm like, he's going to drink and he's going to go out to a friend's house or whatever that was. So those are the kinds of signs that I look for.
So I asked that question because my book is about it's called Spiritual Human Behavior, and it's based on noticing and learning behavior patterns because those are the things that really help you change and become a better person. And as someone who has also studied psychology and getting to understand really at the time it was about understanding myself, understanding the harsh background that I came from and some of the experiences that I had and what influenced those things. So, learning that kind of changed my perspective on life, but it helped me become a better person because now I had all this introspect on, okay, well, I know what they say is, what things make up who you become, and I know what I want to be, I know what I should be. And then it was a matter of beginning to look within myself to kind of pinpoint the areas that I felt needed change. But it took me several years after studying psychology to write in my book to really understand the multiple dynamics and the depths and levels and layers that go into making up a person. And it's interesting to be able to speak to somebody else that also studies psychology and also understands behavior patterns and how those things either really make you or break you.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. We are creatures of patterns and habit. And so if we can self-identify what those are and whether they're helping us or not, which is essential, right? I think people put a lot of moral ground around patterns and behaviors. It's more around, is it healthy or unhealthy? Is it really
Mhm.
helping you achieve the things that you want to achieve, like your goals, or is it not? And that is self-defeating behavior. And sometimes I kind of have a, a short, how do I say, level of patience sometimes when individuals they say they want something yet, and they see their patterns, yet they're not, changing them. Because sometimes, we kind of go through this process like, why aren't you not seeing that? Why aren't you doing something about it? But that's part of being human and having compassion, right? Um, but it is all pattern based, and
Mhm.
I think if people understood these patterns, they can not only help themselves but also help the people around us too. Because the thing is, for me, as a father, I'm very conscious now of my kids' patterns because they're still in that development stage. And so I can say my daughter and my son, there are certain things that I'm worried about. Will they turn out to be fine human beings? I think so.
Right.
But are there patterns that I'm concerned about? Absolutely. And I'll be the first to say this. In my own situation, I ignored some of those patterns because I didn't want to ruffle feathers, for example, with my in-laws or even with my wife or whatever that may have been. But it's come to the point where now with even my own kids, where I'm like, I have to break this pattern because if I
Mhm.
don't break it, they could carry this on for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, what I've noticed is that raising a 14 and 15-year-old, my son will be 16 in like 2 weeks, is that it's a matter of speaking to them in a way that not only directs their path and tell them what to do, but help them gain understanding of the difference in the
Mm.
decisions that you're making, the decisions that you've made, and how making better decisions or different decisions or just looking at things differently would have changed your whole outcome. Now, I always ask guests towards the end of the show if there's anything in their life that they would change. But the reality is, even if you say that you would change some things about your life, uh you it's only too so much difference that it could be because the baseline of who you are is just who you are. Now you can decide to become a better version of yourself, stay where you are, or you can become a lesser version of yourself by making poor decisions or going down a path that you know isn't healthy for you. But the goal overall is really to take an inventory of ourselves and then grow from what we see and learn lessons through every experience and every hard time. Do you find it difficult to learn through those hard times? Well, as a somebody that studies psychology, probably nothing is really difficult for you. What are your difficulties in growth as somebody who knows and understands behavior patterns in psychology?
Yeah, a great question because I do have certain difficulties. I would say for the most part, I'm pretty self-aware and uh, I don't find it challenging or I don't find it an issue. I find it actually challenging when I deal with difficult situations myself because for me, one of my main approaches, one of the questions that I govern myself by or live by is how do I become better as a result of this? So every challenge for me is something I welcome because it's like, okay, I can grow from this. I can get better. And that I would say because I've had that for such a long time, that has enabled me to get to where I am today, both professionally and personally. But there is one area that is a continuous challenge for me, and I'm getting better and better and better and better at it, is with those people that I love the most. So with my children in particular, and my wife, and sometimes even my mom. And so that is a little bit more difficult because there's almost like I used to say, there's some kind of kryptonite in these relationships here. And I don't know what it is because even these things I'm seeing, I used to see, say, I know better than that, but I still allowed that kind of behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or situation. And people, there's this whole, you can say, conversation now that's happening in the personal development world, particularly in relationships, that are around setting boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the big term these days, but it is true. There's some validity to that. And I've had challenges personally with setting boundaries with those people that I love the most. But I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you within the last 5 years, I've gotten way better. In fact, this is a very timely conversation because one of my main themes for this past year and going into next year is setting hard boundaries. Because used to set soft boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and kind of be, because I'm a guy, I grew up with a military dad or a grandfather. My dad was in the police.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was actually very, I'm going to say, kind of OCD, anal. And so I was very much about structure, discipline. But it was, I would say, looking back, I'm like, that's the best thing I could have learned because I can do things now that the most people can't. They complain about it. And it's like, no, just get it done and move on. So now you can enjoy your day and you can do those things, right? But my kids, for example, and my wife, I can say this openly, they used to kind of leverage that against me in terms of being structured and putting a guilt trip on that where I said, okay, maybe I am too structured. Maybe this is hindering their ability to have. But then I look back and say, no, they're smart. They're very smart because I'm not so structured where it's like military with my kids. It's like, let's have structure and you guys go be kids and go play around. Right. So that's what I had to learn where it's very easy, I think, particularly in today's era where we are victimized society for people to easily guilt trip others. And I was kind of played into that game to a certain degree myself.
It is definitely easy to fall into a pattern of being guilt tripped and because you're guilt tripped to kind of go and do the same thing. It's so funny because my daughter anytime that I ask one too many questions, she's like, "So I can't do this now." And I'm like, "Girl, if you don't stop trying to make it seem like I'm limiting you because I'm telling you to do something or not do something, but you're trying to turn it on me like I'm just doing such a bad thing because you're trying to do this one thing that shouldn't be that bad." No, you need to listen and you need to listen now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And kids are so good at it. It's their natural instinct. One
Mhm.
thing I think I don't, I look back and they say, should I have changed this? Should I have done things differently? Right. But my son was very good at negotiating. So a big part of me, the business side of me was just like, this is a great skill. Allow him to build on that skill. But it got to the point where it was becoming manipulative.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, now I got to shut this down because my son is very good. Like he developed this behavior, this pattern of saying, well, dad, you don't love me. And that guilt tripped me so deep. I was like, wow, okay, so what am I doing here? And I realized what happened in that particular instance, if I'm getting very specific about it, was I'm the only one around him in his circle, like close family circle, that sets boundaries. The only
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
And so I
And
was
that can
just
be
like,
hard for not it's not hard for a child. It's hard for a child to receive that boundaries are a good thing. And I
"Mm,
find myself explaining this to my children, even my 16-year-old, um, just the other day, like I'm telling you things that you need to know because you need to know them. If I did not tell you the things that you need to know, it means that I don't care about you knowing them and being
mm,
aware of the things that are essential for you to be the best version of yourself. And it is definitely difficult to try not to limit their nature when it's something that can be beneficial long term versus correcting them because my son he is very intelligent, so if you say something to him about almost anything and he has the opportunity to use it within 5 minutes he will use it and be like, okay, well, isn't that the same thing? And I'm like, damn
yeah,
it. I want to be mad because
uh,
you're really manipulative and it's
yeah,
manipulating the situation. However, that is a good tool for you to be able to use because there are going to be people that will try to outsmart you and you need
right,
that ability to be like, I got you. I got what you're doing here.
yeah,
So it is a great challenge as a parent, as a mom, especially raising a son. Um, I'm not a single parent because I co-parent, but in my household, trying to make sure I have the balance of being his mom and also being a nurturing mom, but also being an authoritative figure in his life and saying, no, there are clear things that need to happen, and there are ways that need to take the things that need to take place in order for us to have a great parent-child relationship. And I am not going to diminish our relationship, but I am going to set boundaries that could limit how you view me for a certain period of time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a best learning experience for every human being is raising children because it can be the biggest challenge aside from
Yeah.
relationship, right? Your intimate relationship. Raising children, I think, is the next biggest challenge. Business for me is kind of like, whatever. If something doesn't go right, that's fine.
Mhm, mhm,
But you look at your kids, and all of a sudden you're like, if I don't do this properly, it could screw them up for life. It's some of
for
the
life.
pressures that we face. It's an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, I agree. So, um, it is the most complex thing, but I definitely think raising children is some of the most rewarding experiences that you can have because it teaches you so much about you. And what I find is the people that don't enjoy parenting aren't normally extremely active parents, and somebody else is taking the bulk of the load, and then they're getting the scraps. So it makes it more difficult when you're not the most influential person in your child's life and you're having to deal with whatever they've already learned and try to make it be what you need it to be or you think that they should be doing versus what you're actually teaching.
Yeah, I think yeah, especially in whether you're if you're co-parenting, and it's so relationships. I don't like to say this because I don't believe relationships are meant to be hard. They're not. They're meant to be effortful, which means you got to put in a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
right, to maintain them. But they shouldn't be hard. When I hear that people say that, I'm like, well, what kind of relationship are you in, right? That it's
Mm-hmm.
so hard. There's challenges, but those are, I think, one of the things. And when we talk about raising healthy children, I think that's one of the things that I'm not worried. But as we see relationships really degrade in today's society
Mm-hmm.
because of this conflict between the masculine and the feminine from an energetic perspective, kids are the ones that lose out the most because
Yeah.
they're seeing this and it's like, okay, what is actually true here? What's going on? And then how do they have healthy relationships? I know through my colleagues who are in the relationship space right now that focus on working with individuals in their 20s and 30s. We're not even talking about kids in their teens right now because I think that's a whole other ballgame. There's a huge challenge for that younger generation when it comes to relationships. And so I think the best thing that we can do as adults is show our kids how to be in healthy relationships because they're going to take that for the rest of their life.
So my question as we get back to the complete man is what makes a complete man?
Oh wow, that's such a loaded question there. Okay, so there's two things that I talk about when it comes to being the complete man, or there's actually three. First of all, you're never complete. It's an ongoing journey and it's continuous. So that's the kind of the irony of it all, right? The moment that we think we got it all, and all of a sudden something falls apart, or we have a lesson that we need to learn from. So that is the biggest part of that because it's a continuous journey. And so I think when we give ourselves grace and space to say, I don't know it all, or I'm getting better, or I haven't done things perfectly, there's an element of what do I say, content in that. And I'm a firm believer of being content, but also having massive aspirations, right? There's a balance there. And I think that's one important thing. The other second part is starting from within
Mm-hmm.
because most guys in particular, I would say women are more open to this, but as women are becoming more masculinized, it's becoming different now too.
Mm-hmm.
Is men typically tend to, when they want to change something, they'll try to change something in their external world, right? If I don't like my relationship, I'm going to try to change my relationship. If I don't like how much money I'm going to make, I'm going to change my job or whatever it is. But the better, more effective approach, and this is shown through science as
Welcome to Speaking Freedom Lounge. Thank you for subscribing. I want to welcome you into our lounge where we connect, we conversate, and we learn everything that you can imagine. Don't hold back. Go ahead, join the community, tap in. We would love to hear from you. Ask questions if you subscribe to that package. Have a great day.
As well now, right, through neuroscience studies, is by changing the internal environment first. So if we change the internal environment, then our external environment starts to shift because it's reacting to us. It's a cycle of back and forth. But if we try to change our environment but stay the same ourselves, then the environment goes back to the way it was. It might change temporarily, but then it goes back. So starting from within is very important. It's also a core part of how I grew up, because I'm not a religious person by any means, but I grew up in a very religious household, and the religion I grew up in was Sikhism, which is traditional, um, you can say, a religious philosophy from Punjab, India, where you see men with turbans, for example, right? That's typically what it's associated with: turbans and beards. Those are the baptized Sikhs. But there's two very strong principles in that. One is what they call, the word Sikh actually means to be disciple, to be a learner. So that's what my grandfather instilled in me, was to be human is to learn. And so life is a journey of learning all the time. That's a core part of our religion. The second is what we call Simran, which is looking or from within to find what we need, because everything we need is within us. That was a core part of our learning too. So that's what I incorporated into the complete man, because I truly believe in that. And that's through life experience as well, because I was always a guy that worked on myself and didn't focus very much. I did when I was younger, the nice cars and stuff like that, but focused on within myself first. And what I noticed was, for the first, let's just say 30 years of my life, there were peers and friends that excelled past me. And what I mean excelled, they made more money, they had bigger houses, they were more successful from that standpoint. But then in my 30s, in particular in my 40s, what I realized was the growth pattern for me is much faster now, because I've worked on myself for so long. And when they face challenges, it's much harder for them to overcome. So that internal work ultimately leads to a faster growth and easier ability to overcome challenges. So that's the other aspect. The third one is what I call being a mindful alpha male, which means that, let's break those two things apart. Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, which is the origin. It's the beginning. It's also been misconstrued because it talked about originally in psychology through biological studies of wolves, the alpha of the wolf pack, and then it was misconstrued. But if you take a look at alpha is the one that's responsible for ensuring that pack survives, looking after the pack, that there's some kind of order, right? That it's just not complete chaos. So it's not about control. It's about being, how do I say, enriched and ensuring that there's survival, and that the part of your family members, if we relate this to human beings, is they get what they need in life. And so I believe that every man should be an alpha male, meaning that they are the creator of their destiny, rather than having destiny handed down to them and be like, here, you deal with it. Here's the leftovers. And we're talking about many men are in this situation today. They feel like they have no control over their life. Like they're a subject to their circumstances rather than creating their circumstances. But
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that because a lot of men feel like they have no control over their lives, does that make them project the alpha male, I'm an alpha male, heal me war type
Yeah.
of energy, versus because I know a guy, and my conversation with him ended up being, hey, um you have too many good attributes about yourself to have that roar energy. You don't
Mhm.
have to be that. You can be gentle because of the things that are going for you well. That would make somebody want to submit, make somebody want to follow your lead. But when you lead with roar, then it makes people shy away and not want to be bothered.
Mhm. I think and I think that's very relevant. To your question, I do agree with that. There is for men that do not have that level, right, are not able to live out that alpha male in terms of being in control of their destiny. It's a perception, right? It's all
Mm-hmm.
perception based.
Mm-hmm.
They have to put on this this front that I am in control. Why? Because it's a basic biological need and desire for men to be able to be in a status or a hierarchy. It's human society. The other part to this too is that everything that we do is based on the environment and the situation as well. It's very situational. So for some
Mm-hmm.
men, they're in a hostile environment where they need to project that. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what in this particular instance if this individual needed to project that, but some men don't. They don't need to project this aggressiveness in in a particular environment, but they feel like they need to. If I use a personal example, my grandfather was a very, you wouldn't be able to tell that my grandfather was in the military or he was just a very quiet man, right? But when people would not argue with him. And he was known for that because they're like, A, they had way too much respect for him to argue with him. And B, if they knew that they were going to pick a fight and argue with him, that he wasn't going to fall or he was going to bite. So it was almost pointless. So he was a very quiet man. If he came into a room, he was the alpha male, but he didn't project it through aggressiveness. So there's different ways of having that level of whatever it is, presence, authority, whatever. But it's an inner peace quality too. I don't need to project out being an alpha male if I feel like I am, if I truly feel like I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in today's era, though, what they're missing is what I talk about on the other spectrum, which is the mindful part, right? And it's the combination of what, and so I kind of modeled this kind of off my grandfather as well, being a very spiritual man, but also being in the military and being very strong. And the mindful part comes from, and the Buddhists say it the best, which is be aware of what you do and perceive things as if it's going to have a ripple effect throughout time in the universe, but also have some kind of humor in that it may not make a difference at all. Meaning that, yeah, be serious about what you are doing and the impact it could have on generations and the people that
Mm-hmm.
come after you, but also don't take yourself so seriously.
Right.
And I think that is a big element of what we're missing in men today, particularly those who show up as being alpha male. We're seeing that a lot in politics, right? Um, is the what's going to happen for generations to come? What is the real impact of our decisions and the actions that we're making right now? I can tell you because the American political system is kind of like the highlight in comedy around the world.
Right.
And we're going to see what happens as a result of this. History books are going to be written for decades to come about this era of men who are not mindful that may have projected themselves to be alpha males. So it's a combination of both. It's taking a look at, hey, I need to take control of my destiny, but also what is the mindful impact that I'm having on myself and people around me?
And so when dealing with your clients and or family and friends, what has been the hardest thing for them to tackle or overcome in order to become the complete man?
Hmm. Wow. There's some key patterns, I would say. So, not having a supportive network, I would say, is one of the biggest things because we as men, we naturally don't want to divulge our weaknesses.
Right.
And it has to be done in a very safe environment for men to be able to do that. So, that in itself is one particular challenge. I would say a lot of men are struggling in their relationship. 8 out of 10 guys that we have worked with or work with are not fulfilled or satisfied in their marriage.
What do you think leads men to um being, I want to say being unsatisfied, but staying in the dissatisfaction?
Okay, so yeah, this again, this is my eyes just open up on this one because I'm very passionate about this because I truly believe that relationships, and it's been shown through science and longevity studies, they're such an important part of life. It brings the most fulfillment
Hmm.
right? Because we are creatures of emotion and connection. So I think we're not given the skills to be in a healthy relationship in the first place. It's modeled, right? Modeled behavior. And what keeps men in relationships, is that sometimes they feel like they could do better. In a lot of cases, they can, whether it's a communication thing, whether it's understanding themselves or their partner better. So if there's someone that's feeling guilt, I can't give up on this relationship, right? Because I can do better. There's something I can do to change. The second part as I mentioned, is not knowing what they could do better or what that looks like because there's no teaching around that really. The third part is I don't want to lose my kids and I don't want to lose my money or my house.
Mhm. Definitely.
That's a big
That's
one.
probably should be number one.
Yeah, it really is because I don't like to blame genders or whatever that is, but I'm seeing
Hmm.
a lot of relationships and dysfunction now coming from the other side now from a feminine perspective. And men don't know how to deal with that. Men don't know how to stay strong in their
Hmm.
energy and they're bending to that. And that's what's creating even more dissatisfaction. So me as a man, is it okay if I have a tough conversation to say, hey, look, I had this with my wife at the beginning. Yeah, I'm a guy that likes to do the outside yard work. I'm not the guy that does the inside. I'll go outside, cut the grass, blow the snow off the driveway. I'll do all that kind of stuff, fix things, build things. But I'm not I still do though, do dishes and cook, but I'm not taking that main responsibility on. Like I had that conversation with my wife. But a lot of guys feel like they're tippy toeing now to have
Hmm.
conversations like that. So if I can't be myself as a man and express my energy, they feel diminished. And then that's when anger sets in. That's when
Hmm.
frustration sets in. And
Resentment, all those things.
all those things. And that's just a recipe for disaster. Because the moment a relationship goes into resentment that is not dealt with, then there's a bigger issue. I could tell you, like, if the court system is interesting. It's become a lot more favorable for, I'm going to say equitable for men now, fair to
Hmm.
men. Before it wasn't. Before it was like, women get the kids. Sorry, buddy, you're stuck. You don't get the kids or you get visitation, whatever it is. It's a lot more equitable. But even then, and I don't want to blame one gender. It's not because men, a lot of times, are not functional relationships. I can
Hmm.
say that very openly. But if there was no fear for men to be themselves, if they are a mindful man, let's just say that's a caveat,
Yeah.
right? No fear of losing their kids or losing their wealth or whatever that is, I think relationships would change significantly.
I definitely think that um fear is ingrained in us through religion a lot of times, and that helps create relationships that have a lot of unbalance and discord at the core of the relationship. Surface level, everybody is forgiving, everybody is loving, everybody is
Mm.
hunky-dory as long as um the presentation is good, but deep-seated issues oftentimes set in, and religion takes you from knowing that this is not a healthy relationship to, well, we can make it work on this relationship, or God will change them. And you put a lot of onus on things outside of the actual individuals involved. And then you start dismissing clear indications that this is not going to work. And once you get in, I know for women, and I'm sure for men as well, it's almost like you don't want to fail quick. So you'll stay there because it's comfort. You don't want to hear the I told you so's and all of that. But a part of being a great accountable person to yourself is owning up when something isn't working out, and hopefully leaving before you get in too deep. But being able to kind of own not only what's not working out, but who you are, who you desire to be, and how you want to show up in a relationship. Because if you can identify how you want to show up in a relationship, then that helps you identify who can show up to meet you in that relationship.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You said it so powerfully because we as individuals need to know who we are first to
Hmm.
be in a healthy, effective relationship. And I can say through our studies, through our experience, I would say less than 10% of the population in general, including men, know who they truly are.
Hmm.
And so if we don't know who we truly are, how are we supposed to have a healthy relationship? Like that is such a
How are we even
fundamental.
supposed to pick the right person? But I always tell people, we go from being children, high school, and from high school, oftentimes getting into relationship in high school and staying in a relationship, break up, get another relationship, and it's on and on and on and on. So we went from taking on what our parents want from us to taking on what high school says we should be, then taking on what religion says we should be, then taking on, okay, now I'm in this relationship, what they think we should be. And then if I break up with that person, don't take no time and I just get into another relationship with that person, and how many ever other people you get involved with think you should be. Then you got your friends, you got all these outside influences. And oftentimes we never get the opportunity to sit still with ourselves and figure out, okay, what do we like? What do we want? What do we see ourselves being in the future? What will make us happy? Not based on what my mom told me, what my dad told me, what a teacher, parent, or any outside force, but what really fulfills us. And because we're always jumping from situation to situation of somebody putting their thoughts, their projections, their shame, their guilt, their judgment on you. So it is interesting to speak with someone again, not that just because you study psychology, but because you are working on yourself with all of these things to be a better person for you, but then teaching other men.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with everything that you said there because we walk around with a whole bunch of expectations and roles that
Mhm.
other people have put on us. And it's a core part of our exercise that we go through when we work with individuals because it's very easy for us to work months, years, even decades in and be in a spot, the typical midlife crisis. Well, why does that happen? It's because
Mhm.
we put on all of these roles and then we realize, holy, perhaps we left a part of ourselves or perhaps we never really got in touch with who we truly are. That's why I'm very careful with my kids and trying to figure out, okay, so where is building conscientiousness as a personality trait for my kids, because I believe that's a very important trait for everybody to have, not over conscientiousness but a healthy level,
Mhm.
but then also allowing them to be themselves and nurturing their own souls and their own direction. Like my daughter is a very quirky kid, right? She's almost like a hippie, like
Mhm.
artistic, loves
Mhm.
animals, and then she's got this interesting spirit. Like just I don't even know how to say it. But there's no way that I want anybody to mess with that until she's old enough to say she wants to do something different or be something different.
Mhm.
My son, I'm a little bit too late because my in-laws had too
Mhm.
much influence on him. And I feel
Mhm.
like I've had this conversation and I openly share this. I am, I wouldn't say angry, but now I'm very diligent in terms of protecting my son from external influences, particularly from my in-laws now. And it's like, no, just don't mess with him. Allow him to be himself. He
Mhm.
doesn't need to be a doctor or surgeon making millions of dollars and being successful or living in this type of area. No, he just needs to be a kid.
Right now, anyways, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is very, I know in other cultures, especially, it is very daunting, but even in the American culture, for children to be pressured into going down a certain avenue. And then they do realize at midlife, or what we consider midlife, that this is not what they really wanted to do. And then that is definitely what creates the crisis, because you've been putting on this mask for so long to where now you reach a certain age and you're like, wait a minute, none of this shit is making me happy. Everything is, is bad.
Yeah.
And so I definitely understand, and I too have taken a lot of time to kind of shape what my children are exposed to as much as possible, because you have, of course, TV, the
Mm.
internet, everything else that can play into that. But in general, just not sheltering, but yeah, sheltering to an extent till they get to an age that's old enough to where they can say, wait a minute, this is me, that's you, and
Yeah.
let's keep that separate. So I definitely understand how that goes. So as a parent, what are some of the things that you have found to be most difficult to change about you, that you've learned through parenting to change about you and help kind of craft um your knowledge into teaching your children?
Well, the by far the most difficult is that, there's an old saying where you can't be a priest or a pastor in the land that you grew up in. Like my kids don't see me as a professional. And so I have a certain amount of expertise. I work with top CEOs globally and executives, and I have a certain skill set, and I'm proud of that. But when it comes to my kids, that goes out the window. I can't be that person with them. I can't use those skills with them. To a certain degree I can, but it's really interesting because I'm just like a normal everyday dad. And so now as a normal everyday dad that can't use the same tools that I use with my clients, how do I approach this? That is probably the most challenging part. And how do I approach it in a way where I'm not an authoritarian, right? Like I'm not a dictator, but there's an authoritative approach because they still need to understand that I have some wisdom and knowledge. I would say that's the biggest thing. I have a tendency to sometimes with my kids, because I am a teacher, right? Because I do teach, I do workshops, I do all those kinds of things, to go into teacher mode, and that doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work at all. That goes, again, that's just futile. So I have to use a different approach. And so a big part of me is like, how do I get them to understand? And so it's the approach more than anything. One of the things that I actually started to do is, okay, so my son loves to read. I want him to read more about emotional intelligence because he needs some work in that area. And then it's like, well, how do I get him to do that? Because he just puts up a roadblock and says, I'm not reading that garbage. And so it's okay, I have to reward him with computer time. So that has been great. But something beautiful has happened for me and my son recently is when I got him this book on self-awareness. And it's a Harvard book. It's just a small book, but I said, you read every chapter and you get an extra 15 minutes of computer time. So he's like, okay. And then he said, hey, do you mind sitting with me while I read it? Sure. And my original intent was for us to discuss it. Now it's at the point where he suggested that we discuss it. So this is great. And we've had some beautiful moments because the last few days, even yesterday, we sat there talking about self-awareness and self-reflection in particular. And I was amazed at in terms of his ability to pick up on that and talk about it openly. And I can also see the challenges that he faced when we talked about certain things. Like, in the book, they were talking about, well, self-reflect on how you are helping other people in the workforce achieve their goals. Now we equated it to family. And the moment we said family, he's like, I don't want to talk about that. I was like, well, what do you mean? You don't want to talk about that? Because inside he knew like there's this level of guilt that he perhaps is not doing as much as he could to help other people, like his sister, help her with her goals. So it's interesting to see these types of things come out. But going back to your original question, it's the approach of how do I do this as a dad and not a professional?
Are you able to use some of the things that you do as a dad in your profession?
Oh, absolutely. Because if I can help my children change their behaviors and stuff, then that will help me with adults because adults are just big kids, right? And so
Yeah.
I do try different approaches with my kids, so they are kind of like an experiment too. So I try different, but it's also a great learning for myself as an educator and as an advisor or coach or trainer, because I'm like, oh wow, like okay, I tried this approach with them. They taught me this isn't effective because sometimes they'll say, hey, Dad, the way you said that wasn't very nice. I'm like, okay, note taken. Let me see if I can apply this to my profession. So there's some things that work, some things that don't, but I'm like, okay, it's a great learning experience for me.
Um, what advice would you give to a man that is struggling in any area? You can pick one. And they're in need of encouragement and help understanding how to pick themselves up and to be a better man.
Yeah, the first one that I go to is support, right? It's such a key part. So for us, I break everything down into four areas, four main buckets, right? And so I studied the crap out of this and we did so much research in this area to try to break it down so it's easily consumable by people and understandable, but everything falls into one of four buckets. The first one is strategy. The second is state, the third is systems, and the fourth is support. Everything that goes wrong or everything that goes right falls into one of those four buckets. If you don't have an effective strategy, which is the goals that you want to achieve and the approach and your resource allocation, you're not going to get there. as effective. State is how you show up every moment. Systems are basically the tools, the technology, the habits that you use to achieve what you want. And then support is who you surround yourself by. And support is such a powerful thing, because if we're supported, and this, as guys, we're sometimes very guilty of this, because we have a natural tendency and desire to do it independently, whereas women are more communal. And so that whole Lone Ranger approach is very challenging for men. So I would say, don't be the Lone Ranger if you're going through a challenge. Find your partner. In this case, it was Tonto. I can say that because I just watched the Lone Ranger movie, and so we just watched it a couple of days ago. But find your sidekick, find your support group, find your people that can be there and support you along the way. I know through my toughest times, it's been people, and we're not talking about in today's era. We have how do I say it? We favor people who have these big audiences, these social media influencers, celebrities. But the best people in my life, I can say this without a shadow of a doubt, that have taught me the biggest lessons are not famous people. They're the everyday people with wisdom that just went through life. And find those individuals. I think we discount our elders way too much. I think we discount people that have gone through tough experiences. So I would say that's the first part, right? Find the support. Secondly, I think it really comes down to self-education and awareness. That's really what it is. And so I'm a firm believer of doing deep dives into a particular area. So if it's a relationship challenge, do a deep dive into relationships. Commit yourself to the next 2 to 3 months in terms of learning everything that you can about relationships. And I guarantee you will find things that you never expected to find. And that in itself is very, very powerful. And as much as, and I'm falling into this category too, that I think I know about something in particular. Like I just read this other study just moments before we got on the podcast. I'm like, holy crow, I didn't know that. Like this is something new that I can now utilize in my approach. And so doing a deep dive is the second part to this part. If I'm going to say anything else in terms of how to actually go down this journey, I would say goals are very important. Like goals, and most people have professional goals, most people have financial goals, but they don't have those personal goals. And when I say that is about personal goals about who they are internally, whether that's their character, whether that's how they want to feel, because those are the most powerful things. And I think by far, people ask me when I do these podcasts, like, what is the one advice you want to give to men? And it's like, okay, well, there's so much, but the one thing I would focus on is the ability to master our emotions. Because if we can master our emotions, it's far easier to get to where we want to be. If we are slaves to our emotions, oh, that's a very difficult path. That is so challenging because our emotions can easily throw us off. And so by understanding what emotions are, how they operate, what influences emotions, and there's different types, and there's different types of feelings because emotions fall within this broader group of feelings. If we understand that, we learn how to leverage our emotions and feelings in our favor, it becomes far more powerful. So that's one area that I work extensively with on men, because once men know how to manage their emotions and feelings and eventually master them, it's far easier to do everything else.
I definitely need to have you back on the show to talk about men mastering their emotions,
Mhm.
because I feel as though of course, today we have all these hot topics. Emotional intelligence is one of those topics, but that is one topic that is really necessary for people to begin to understand. We can't make people emotionally intelligent, but we can provide the information that they need to begin to start thinking along the lines of someone who is more emotionally intelligent. Because I
Yeah.
find that not just men, women are probably worse off than men, if I'm being honest, run away with their emotions. And
Mm.
I find also that a lot of men don't understand that there are women with logic that
Yeah.
operate
Yeah.
on a more logical wavelength without being masculine. And then there is, of course, a whole nother area that we can go in, this masculine versus feminine energy
Mm.
topic that's going on. There's so many shows that we could do
Yeah.
just to help people grow and understand the difference between the extremes and the moderation and the places that we should be when it comes to these different topics.
Yeah, I love it because there's so much in those other topics that you talked about. They themselves, you can spend hours on those alone.
Alone, because I mean, let's just think about how many podcasts nowadays that are emotionally driven when it's talking about
Mm.
men and money, whether it's talking about 50-50, whether it talks about who should provide what, gender roles. There's so many things that people get caught up in on the emotional side of it versus really like, let's talk about it, let's break it down and get an understanding of one, where people are coming from, but then two, how to navigate that area of life in any given area and topic. So can you tell us about your book and what else you have offering as we get ready to close this interview?
Yeah, so the book is available on all platforms. You can go to completemanaudio.com if you prefer digital. It's got the digital audio and ebook. And if you want a promo code, it's Victory75. So Victory75, all one word. The 75 are obviously numbers, but that'll give you 75% off. And you can go to completemanaudio.com. And so it is for men. In fact, it's the funny thing is we have probably just as many female readers as male readers. That is the phenomenal part that came out of this, is because a lot of women wanted to understand their men better. And we get feedback all the time to say, thank you. I misunderstood my husband or even my son because I was concerned about my son. He's a teenager or he's a young adult in terms of how to work with him or deal with him. This has opened their eyes. So I'm happy to hear that. And interesting enough, there's one chapter in that book that I think has been more, how do I say it? People have been more vocal about and feedback about when that's a chapter on addictions. And
Mhm.
I did not expect that whatsoever. So that just tells me that there is a challenge out there in particular for the men in the community for men. So
Mhm.
that's about the book. Um, and if there's anything else that I can do to help people, I'm more than happy to. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn. We do provide most of our offerings. We do training, coaching, assessments, workshops, keynotes, but are typically within the business environment or atmosphere. That's typically our focus. So more than happy to chat about that if anyone's interested.
Well, I am so happy that you presented those offerings, and definitely you guys use the discount code. I'm so happy that you came and spoke with me today, and I really look forward to having you back because there, again, is so much that we could talk about that would really help people to expand their knowledge base. I'm definitely buying the book as a mother of a son, and as a woman who desires to be a better woman to men. One of the things that I pray about the most as a black woman is to not raise a black man that hates black women because I didn't understand him enough to give him the tools that he needed to appreciate me.
Interesting. Wow. Wow. That is a very insightful, I would say, and very mindful as a mother.
I mean, if we really look at life, and how our parents impact us, mostly it is our parents that shape
Mm-hmm.
how we view people,
Mm-hmm.
the world. Of course, we have other outside influences, but our parents are the main um presentation that we're given of how to move forward and how to progress. And I see a lot of times, not just as a black woman, I'm sure all mothers are worried about whether or not how their son will treat women and how their son will see women. And it should be just the same with women or fathers with their daughters. Um, and so I just realize I know some people that really just hate women. I know some black men that really, I mean, literally have said they hate black women. And I was like, well, I don't want my son to be one of those
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
because it's crazy. And it really made me kind of approach being a mom different for my
Mm.
son. but also for my daughter because she has to be around men, she has to
Mm.
love a man, and she has a brother that and a dad that she has to also know how to deal with appropriately. So I really appreciate all the work that you've done and all the work that you will continue to do for men because men are definitely underserved. They don't get the recognition that they deserve. They oftentimes don't have anyone to speak up on their behalf when they're done wrong or when something just doesn't make sense. And that has to change. We give so much leeway to women and oh, she's a woman and she can do these things and those things. And we teach them so many things on the emotional side, but we don't always teach women how to be good for men or
Mm.
not good for men, but good to men.
Yeah.
Because a lot of women are more performative in trying to impress men, but then they get a man and they don't know how to treat that man. So being able to help women to understand men more and then being able to help men understand themselves so they can be better for women is going to be the biggest blessing that you are able to provide with your book, especially because there are definitely a lot of women that want to understand men.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this was a pleasure. I had a blast chatting with you over the last little bit. So appreciate it and thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, and we look forward to hearing more from you. But until next time, everybody, that has been this episode of Speaking Freedoms TV, Journey to Freedom. Bye, everyone.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kaci, not your typical clinical doctor. I am an ordained minister, but not your typical minister. I am also a certified life coach, love coach, sex coach, solution focused coach, transformation coach, and more. I have a whole lot of information that I would like to help you grow with. And I hope that soon I can help you be the best you that you can be. Confidence, spirituality, and purpose. That's wholeness, complete. Hi, I'm Kaci, Dr. Kaci. Welcome to Speaking Freedom. We are happy to have you and we hope that we are able to help you in every way possible. Have a good evening. If you've enjoyed this video, like, share, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. New episode every Friday.